My name is Nina Tobin, I'm the Artistic Director of South Tipperary Arts Centre, and this symposium, is in conjunction with our exhibition WAAG and Archive, which is in our main space on Nelson Street, and I hope that you can all take the opportunity to go and see that during the lunch break, as long as we don't go too. There'll also hopefully be opportunities maybe after we finish up, if you didn't get here during lunchtime, to go and see the exhibition. And the exhibition is, as the title denotes, an archive, and it's completely based on the archival information and material that is stored at NIVAL in NCAD, with the exception of a couple of rare gems that the wonderful Pauline Cummins gave to us to use, including the wonderful period t-shirt, which you can see, and a couple of catalogues that would have been in the NIVAL collection. And there are also slides of a select number of artists that were mainly selected by myself and my curatorial assistant Iris, mainly to kind of try and give a breadth of the types of artists that were part of WAAG. We couldn't include everyone because there's something like 600 slides, so we decided to try and just pick a select number of people to give a range of the age and the breadth of work by the artists that were part of WAAG at that time. So I suppose, to give a little bit of context, the idea for the exhibition came from having an understanding of WAAG, limited, and then working with Pauline and Francis Cummins and Francis Mazzetti when we were doing the Walking Away exhibition. And it was during that time that Pauline mentioned that it was founded in Clonmel. And I was like, there's always these things founded in Clonmel. What happens around here? And I'm from kind of closer to Carrick-on-Suir, kind of tiny village in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, there's so many of us that are doing so many interesting things, and not a lot of people know about it. And I suppose it becomes centralised, knowledge becomes centralised, and information becomes centralised, and who saves the information and who says what is remembered. And I think that's always something I'm very interested in. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a number of the conversations today, including the conversation around archives. What is an archive? What should be included in an archive? Who is in an archive? Who's left out of an archive? Etc. And that conversation happened about 2.5 years ago. So the exhibition then has been in the making more intensively than in the last year. And I was very cognizant to focus solely on the archive because it's really important to look at what happened, how it happened, who was involved, and to give a sense of maybe the time, the context, and the labour. I was quite overwhelmed by the labour, and that was because obviously there was no copy and paste, except for maybe cutting something out and photocopying it. And I'm not so young that I don't remember but still, the labour of the intense labour of the administration and the organising of all these people and the exhibitions and getting people to listen, and the language used in reviews by male and female writers, and the clutching of pearls, and this kind of thing. I just found it really interesting that this was happening at a time when I was alive. I was young, but it's within a lifetime, and I just think people like me and other artists of my generation are either working as professionals, we're artists, or we're curators, or we're whatever. And there's something to be said for the fact that we may not be in these positions if it wasn't for the people who've done the fighting already and made it really, I suppose, like just common and totally normal to be in these positions and to hope to be able to work this way in our chosen careers. So I think that's another reason why we should really remember the past. And I think, without getting too political, I do think that now is a really important time, more than ever, to remember our past and to remember why we are where we are, and kind of looking at where we want to go forward. And I don't think you can do that with your eyes closed. So I hope that these conversations today will just expand thoughts and conversations around ideas that you're already having, and that artists are already doing, and maybe to just expand those somewhat and see where that takes us, where that moves us next. So our first discussion today is going to be around the legacy of WAAG with two of the members, former members of WAAG. So I have wonderful Sarah Kelleher, art historian and curator, to have a conversation with the lovely Pauline and Louise. So both Pauline and Louise would have been heavily involved in WAAG, and Pauline would have been very much there from the inception and at the very first meeting here in Clonmel with a number of artists. And one of the things I am really interested in is the fact that it took a village, and there were a number of people who came in and out at different times who drove certain strands of what happened, and some people then had to duck out and do other things, raise families, do other things. So I think it's really important that we kind of look at the overall context and how everybody pulled their weight and how they got to where they got to over the space of 4 years. A huge amount of work got done in 4 years. It was really, really impressive. So I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much for the invite to be here today and for initiating this project and this discussion. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be here, and the atmosphere just in the room at any WAAG event is just so uplifting and exciting. And we're also especially privileged that Breda Mooney is here joining us today.
Yay!
Breda is such an important member of WAAG and has travelled from Portugal to be here with us. So we might try and involve you in conversation at some point, Breda. And again, thanks to Helena for organising this exhibition and this conversation, which again gives us a chance to build a fuller picture of this really important moment and this movement, which has essentially been foundational to the ways in which our arts infrastructure has developed in Ireland and the opportunities it made possible for people. So I suppose I'd like to start with a little bit of scene setting maybe, and to ask you how you came to be in Clonmel. Pauline, I know you were in Wicklow, and Louise, you were between Cork and Belfast. How did you come to be in Clonmel?
Will I take that?
Do.
Yeah. I think my memory, and I think we all now know we all have different memories, but I remember that it was a request from Jenny Houghton on behalf of a friend of hers called Denise Osborne, and who was feeling very isolated, living in a rural area, no contact with other artists. It was a very common problem, and we agreed to go down and meet, in her house in Clonmel. And it was a farmhouse, as you remember, or Breda remembered. Oh no, we were just a small farmhouse, and we were all gathered there.
Around a kitchen table in a very traditional kind of house, old house.
Yeah, and I don't think it was very long before we were all kind of saying, well, I'm annoyed about this, and what are you annoyed about this? And, and it was very quickly like, we're not getting our fair share here.
Yeah. So this is a conversation that had been building and bubbling, but there's this kind of this sparking moment around that kitchen table in that farmhouse.
Yeah.
And WAAG was initiated there. So was the name something that kind of came to you at that
again,
moment?
I don't know whether it was at that meeting, but I knew, I mean, we had been informed by other organisations in other countries, like the Women's Artists Slide Library in London, and Alana O'Kelly and Talantar were in London. So people were organising. Louise was in Belfast, they were organising, but it was like small groups of people talking about their own situation. And now it was a broader group of people. I remember having the WAAG logo just made up myself, just the word WAAG, which I thought was funny. And I thought, I had worked in advertising. I thought that word will be used, wagging the tail of wag. And this was before any footballers' wives were on the scene. So, and I think I might sue them. But no, but it was. I kind of knew. Look, we won't get anywhere on our own.
Yeah.
We have to have an organisation.
But you were also very clear about, and I think we all kind of, the action was really important in it. You know, the sense of needing to grab hold of things by the throat and shake them hard, because, and also there's several things that I think are really important in the context. We had the Kerry baby situation that had happened. We'd had Eileen,
Lovett.
Anne Lovett, sorry, and the Eileen
Yeah.
Flynn case,
Yeah.
where she took the church to court for unfair dismissal and lost because she was pregnant and not married to the man she was living with, who was separated, and they were in a very stable. So there was this kind of sense of oppression that had really amplified, and then there was the cases around abortion where and divorce, and you know, in the AIDS crisis, contraception was illegal, you know. Durex was, do you know what I mean? We had no access to our own bodies, and I think that was part of not just the fact that we were being oppressed physically as females, but then our work, there was no voice, we weren't getting out there. So I think that's a really important part.
I think when we were talking yesterday, you described the 80s as like this decade of horror. Just horror building on horror.
I still feel it.
Yeah. And so this was galvanizing the sense of kind of collective action. But the other thing that I think is really important as well is this sense that, like, that sense of separation and disconnection, the sense that, like, the arts landscape that was available to you at that moment in the 80s. Again, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, like what kind of infrastructure was there? Like,
I think I mentioned that I was educated in the old National College of Art, so a very different approach, and it was so bad that we went on strike and occupied the building. So that was a very different experience to other colleges that were functioning. Like, there was no library in that, no library at all in the National College of Art. I don't think anybody, like, I think Picasso was frowned upon. Honestly, you were saying you were alive when WAAG started. Picasso was alive when I was in college. I could have gone, not that I would have wanted to meet him, but you know, he was around, and no mention of any contemporary art. We were taught by people from the RHA. I don't know what the description of their, job was, but nobody was happy, and we went on strike. So it was a very different experience, I think, to people who came along later in possibly better colleges.
So you had an experience of collective action, essentially.
Well, true, and it influenced my attitude to art completely. It was, the best thing that could have happened for me. I was 18, and I was like, whoa, Maoists, wow,
And Louise, you were talking yesterday about your experience in art college as well.
I mean, Alice Maher and I went to college at the same time, although Alice you'd had a degree somewhere else, so you were a mature student. Technically, we wouldn't call you, but you were a young woman, but
experienced.
You had been in Limerick and done a degree, and it seemed much more urbane than a lot of us. And there was a few other people like Anya O'Brien who'd been involved in Grapevine. And when we came into a cohort in the Crawford, it was very traditional. And Henry Moore, and there was a variation of turds on plinths in the sculpture department that I was expected to aspire to. But also, so we took on a certain amount of it, because in our view it was very negatized. And I don't know if you remember this, Alice, but I thought it was very interesting. The assessment processes were very opaque, so people would just put a mark down, they'd amalgamate them together and round it off and put it up on the board with your name. So in fact the students did a thing where we assessed the staff. And it was incredible how confronted and outraged they were by us doing the same thing to them. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of notion about how education should be democratized and opened up and kind of explored. And there was no way, there was a lot of things. It was very narrow as well, but at the same time, there was this thing happening, feminism was happening, there was queer activism happening around the co-op and Cork, and and so there was this real sense again of collective, but it was a very traditional space, although there were interesting staff members individually doing things. And it was interesting because then I went up to Belfast, but the first thing, we both went up, Alice and I, for interviews, and there was 5, possibly 6 men in a row interviewing me. And I think it was that kind of relationship with establishments that were extremely male and extremely othering then, as you would. So I was talking about feminism, and they were like, stroking their beards. And it was just this sense of you were other no matter what you did at that age and that space, but also as your gender. And, you know, queer wasn't even a discussion at the time.
No. So you have this sense of like this grassroots activism at this moment in the 80s, whether it's kind of working class activism, feminist activism, anti-apartheid activism, and also kind of like against the context of the Troubles of the North, and then this moment of butting up against those ingrained patriarchal power structures in education.
There was no relationship. There were these tiers of power going on, and it was there wasn't any kind of getting up through it.
Can I just paint a picture of access to contemporary art, because you had to travel to see contemporary art, and there was a gallery called Richie Hendricks Gallery that had contemporary art, kind of an exclusive feel of going into it, but it was there. I think the Douglas Hyde or Trinity Library put on a show of Picasso's etchings. But to see contemporary art was only when ROSC was happening. And then ROSC was again exclusive, no women, until, I have to look it up.
84, wasn't it?
84.
Yeah, and then so this was happening, you know, who is important, who are the big artists? No women. So I think that was important, and no access. You had to, you know, I couldn't afford magazines, I couldn't afford art books, and the libraries I don't think would have carried, you know, very many books that were about contemporary art. So it was just not around, and so you had to get out of the country to see anything. So going to London was a big deal.
Yeah, and then there was, in Dublin in 1987, there was this International Women's Congress that happened. And I think that, you know, a lot of us converged in Dublin to go to that, and there was the exhibitions, the women exhibitions that happened historically more, and then there was the Douglas Hyde where a few of us were included, but it was a tiny little cohort, you know. And I think what happened for me, and it predates Clonmel in a way, where we converged in Clonmel to try and make it about access from not just everything happening in Dublin. But Pauline organised, and Breda organised, this incredible slide collection of open access images of women artists working in the country.
Oh, wow.
And
it was in the project.
Yeah, can I just mention Maeve Ruan, who was working in the Arts Council then? And she put out a call. Breda and I were talking last night, jogging each other's memories. She put out a call for someone to help do something together around contemporary artists. I had a bee in my bonnet about the critic in the Irish Times, Brian Fallon, and who would, you know, like, there were no women artists in Ireland. He was one woman artist in Ireland. There were three. And they were all painters, I think. No, anyway, it doesn't matter. But, you know, and then we got really the idea with Maeve Ruan, because she had support, she had contacts. Remember, we had to post anything or phone anything. I lived in Blessington. It was a long distance call to call Dublin. Do you remember all that? You know, no mobile phones, nothing.
Most people didn't have phones either.
No, but I just wanted to say that that's how it happened. Maeve got us together. Breda and I met at that meeting. And then we worked on gathering as many slides as we could, because we were going to show how many women artists. And there were 191 women artists. Their name and 3 images of their work, just continually showing very large on the wall in the project for a week. And Maeve nicely invited Brian Fallon.
Wow, it's very decent of her. And did he review the show, or did he write it up?
Well, he had to sit there looking at 91 women.
And also, I would like to make this point, because I think it's really important. The exhibition that was held by Brian McCavra, called Directions Out, early in 1987. And I think that was a piece, of bringing work from the north down to the south to talk about the troubles and how artists had responded to it. And, you know, the premise was interesting, how the struggle and how surviving in, you know, this war zone and the space, you know, was in, and having it in the Douglas Hyde. There was not one woman in that exhibition. Now, I was living in Belfast at the time. There was plenty of women engaging with the subject matter, just not in the guns and, you know, helicopters mode, although there were some.
Yeah.
But not one woman was there, and I think that was, I
One of
remember
them,
that
yeah,
being very
really
galvanising
annoying.
at the time, at 1987, when there's all this work all over the world, and we're all getting our heads up over the parapet, not getting any chances, but getting to see that this exhibition would happen, and that nobody remarked upon the fact. Do you know, again,
That it
you
was
know,
just
that
taken for
Northern
granted.
Ireland was about the men telling us how it was, you know, in a very specific way, curated and presented like it's everyone. And I think that drove us bananas, you know.
There was another show called Making Sense in the project, again all male.
And so you have this sense of like this building frustration.
That was 83.
83.
Yeah.
And so I'm just interested in, again, in the infrastructure. Like Helena mentioned the labour that went into organising. And like before, like Circus starts in 1983, isn't it? So how did you put the call out for the slides? How did you gather them? Where were they?
Well, again, that was Maeve, because
Yes.
Maeve had access, office access, names, organised, and she was the one who kind of called in people. And of course, to get a call from the Arts Council and to be, you know, asked to include your work was just brilliant for everyone. Making slides was very expensive. Taking photographs wasn't everybody's, you know,
Skill set,
skill set.
Yeah.
To have a good camera with it.
Yeah, so, you know, many of us didn't have a decent camera, or didn't know how to take proper photographs, so we learned very quickly. Yeah, all of us.
So I know that like when we were in conversation yesterday, one of the things that was really important to you was the sense of building connections, building a network, a kind of support structure for artists outside of the Pale, but also making connections with international groups. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how they maybe influence the setting up of WAAG? Or?
I was shite at that. You were the one who did that.
No, Breda and I, we were very, I think, you know, we were very naive and we were very ambitious. And we thought it has to be countrywide, it has to be national. And so we organised visits to Cork, where there was organised centres there, like the I want to say the Crystal, but it's not the Crystal. Triskel. And Catherine O'Lanacon in Galway, very important contact, and had loads of contacts and was really full of energy about organising shows. And it just, I felt it meant a lot that we just came and said, we're here, you know, we know you're there, and let's keep the conversation going. We went to Belfast, and
Fiona
Cork.
Barber was also
Fiona
somebody
Barber,
who was
very
very
important.
good at, you know, connecting politically and making connections, in her training as an art historian and her identity as a kind of the importance of holding things and holding information and galvanizing the information and you know, political thinking. I mean, I think she identified as an anarchist socialist as well, you know, at the time, or was interested in those kinds of ideas. Was also somebody who was pushing things around.
So it was people who had access, you know, to phones and who could afford the postage and began to do that kind of thing. So we got a lot of help. I also want to mention the help we got from journalists. They were really interested, and of course we were good copy. You know, we were really good artists, we were dynamic, we were having shows, which was the key requirement by the members. They wanted exhibitions, we wanted publications. And then we could talk about the international connection. Breda and I took the initiative. I don't know how we heard about this event in Holland, but it was a women's, you know, collective.
It's the International Association of Women Artists.
Yes, but it was the Dutch members of the International Association of But the first one we went to in Amsterdam was the Dutch. And we went like innocents. Oh my God, is this how you do it? They were calling out museums. They were saying, where's all the work? Where's all the older artists? You know, they were complaining because the money they got every week for being an artist wasn't enough. We were like... And,
the outrage of it.
Yeah, and they were just really dynamic. They were brilliant. Crynie Bain was the leading member that we connected with. And Reef van der Linden, who was very important always for us, a writer. So it was always that lovely combination of art historian, writer, and visual artist. And so we learned an awful lot at that symposium in Amsterdam. And we also learned that we could become members of the International Association of Women in the Arts. And they were already WASL, the Women's Artist Slide Library, based in London, they had sent out a call for Irish women to send their work. But when we applied to join, they wanted us to become associate members of their...
Oh, rather than full members?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
okay.
you're in the colonies now.
Nearly.
Yeah.
So that went down like
Yeah.
And we had already made friends with Dutch people. Breda Mooney, I have to say, is a catalyst for talking and getting people together and having fun. And then you become friends with the Austrian artists, and then you become friends with the Dutch artists. And
the reason they came to our rooms is I wrote a lot of gems.
Your skill set.
yeah. But I think it was your hospitality, which everyone spoke
charisma,
about.
yeah.
They spoke about it at the WAAG seminar in Imma. That you were a key person for just getting people together and having fun, you know, as well as working and plotting and planning.
Because I think that is the thing, isn't it, when we're talking about collectives and histories of collectives, they're kind of a hard thing to write because you talk about the actions and the things that were initiated, but also different people's roles can be, you know, they change over time. And often it's more about personalities and what particular skill set somebody might bring.
And everyone brings different.
Yeah.
And I do think as well, so there was this kind of need to take on the professional set, I suppose, and the kind of taking on the establishment. But there was also, for me, particularly in those eras, a kind of a sense of the activism that was going on underground, and queer activism and feminist activism, and in Northern Ireland, the war and what was going on there. Yeah. But also, so we would have to go abroad to have a culture, I felt a lot of the time, to kind of nearly, like I'd go to Pride in London because there was no Prides in Ireland, and there wasn't even, like, to see more than 20 queers in a room was like such a blast. You know, so you were then learning how people and gay men and lesbians and divisions and you know, between black lesbians and the black sisters of South, you know, Southall sisters, but you were understanding more and more about how shit broke down, you know, how the world has to be constituted. So WAAG worked on a lot of different areas, I think, you know, because there was also that very basic thing of consciousness raising, you know, where you were kind of saying to a woman, you know, you don't have to go where your husband tells you, or, you know, very simple stuff would go on against very kind of advanced political thinking. And I think that was kind of complicated often to manage in a room where somebody just wanted to say how oppressed they were and how they weren't able to make work, and somebody else was going to show in a museum. And there was this thing of, I think a lot of maybe older professional artists, female artists, were kind of not wanting to associate themselves so much with the nuts and bolts and knitting and kind of craft of being female in the making of art and the reaction to the bodiliness of it, because it was quite kind of you know, it was quite abject. Some of the women's art that was being made was activist and again coming out of a kind of a consciousness raising and coming out of huge oppression. So it was maybe often unsophisticated or felt like you didn't want to be some people didn't want to be associated with WAAG because it made you one of them as opposed to one of them, you know.
Because there is that complication, isn't there? And this
Shame
is-
of it as
The
well.
perceived idea around feminism.
We have we came across this complication as well. Myself and my colleague, Dr. Rachel Warner, when we did a conversation with WAAG and with the RHA back in 2020. It was during COVID, and there was a lot of pushback against this sense of older artists as being pigeonholed as being women artists, and the sense that maybe at the time when WAAG was initiated, was there also a little bit of pushback by some women that did not want to be pigeonholed in terms of their practice?
Yeah, and I mean, I understand that, and I, you know, do you want to be called an Irish artist?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to be called a woman artist? Do you want to be called a video artist, a performance artist? None of them are really what you are.
Yeah.
So I did understand that, just in context and for historic note. And when you said about older, more established artists, Anne Madden was in the first WAAG show.
Yeah.
So you got some, you know, most unexpected, somebody coming saying, well done, you're doing a good job there, you know, and you become, oh, you know. So it was really nice that you got loads of support.
Yeah.
And I think we just took, sorry? Yeah.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Because that is one of the questions. I was chatting to Eve Olney on the way up, and we were talking about, okay, what other things do we need to know? And like thinking about the allies and the network of support that you generated. But were there male allies as well?
Jobst, I think, and people like
Yeah.
Jobst. And
Yeah, and I mean, I must say Declan McGonigal was key and we had a seminar in Derry in '88, and he financed that totally for us. I mean, it made sense for him. He had an amazing Mae Stevens, the artist from America, Maura Roth. We had Helen Chadwick at our first, meeting in '88. I mean, there was kind of things were rolling along because of the energy, I think, and because
and the ambition.
And the ambition.
Yeah.
And I remember Breda and I nearly had a heart attack because Declan rang and said he wanted a 3-way telephone call, and we were like, how does that happen? So it was a learning curve, I think.
And that sense of connection with practitioners across Europe and across America,
Yeah.
and the way it facilitated particular opportunities for your members, didn't
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, the sense of breaking out of what seems like would have been a very suffocating
Small island.
Yeah, small island.
The Italians or the video cameras.
the Italians.
That was a big draw.
Yeah, and every artist you met in had a catalogue.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody,
And a
every
card,
artist you
a
met,
card.
like a beautiful catalogue and a card, you know, and we were like, oh, I love that. What I wanted to just say about the importance of the international connection was we understood about money, getting money, because it was really difficult to get any financial support from the Arts Council or anywhere else. Rita Mooney, may I mention her again, was key in applying to the European Women's Office for finance. And, I tell you, pages and pages of application to be filled in, you know. And we were successful in getting the money. And, yeah, well, that's another story.
We said, we really need money. They said, no, you can't have it. And I said, because we're women. That's discrimination.
Yeah.
Where's the money?
Well, it was our money. It was our money.
Excuse me.
They didn't give us a loan, Breda. It was our money. Yeah, yeah. But just learning how to do things, you know, and the European, there was, you know, the capital city of Europe got funding, and so we were invited to Bonn, where Patricia McKenna was there, and Alice, I think Mar was in that exhibition. So that was a lovely thing to go to a feminist museum, a huge museum, and be shown alongside other artists, and to measure yourself on a bigger stage. So that was really important, and those connections. You know, there was other opportunities for other people to meet people, to make their own connections with other artists, which I know Patricia did.
And you had the opportunity through WAAG to travel to the States, didn't you?
It wasn't through, yeah, I mean, I decided kind of, I don't know why, I don't know how I did it, because I had no money, and I got a tiny leftover piece of a grant that a man had got from the Alice Berger Hammerschlager Award. I got 200 sterling.
Wow.
And I think I might have got an Arts Council flight to America, and I took slides around and did these. So Leon Golub and Nancy Spiro brought me to her apartment and had I did a slideshow there, and she put me in touch with AIR Gallery, which was a feminist gallery, and I did a slideshow there.
Yeah.
And so I showed the work of women again who had sent me stuff from WAAG, and Alice was doing a Fulbright scholarship. She had, after we'd done the MA in Belfast, Alice got this great scholarship in the San Francisco Arts Academy, was it the Arts Institute? Yeah. But also there was Irish women who had given me slides who were in Chicago, so I was completely opportunistic, staying on people's couches, going and saying, have you anywhere I'd do a slideshow? And I'd do a slideshow in the Irish, Irish, I did one in the Irish Centre in New York, and I went to Chicago, and I went to San Francisco, and went out to Oakland to a feminist lesbian organisation and did it there. Like, it was shameless and kind of just on the hack around the place. It was this kind of really live year of the WAAG stuff, 1987, 88, all that stuff was going on, but it was kind of going on, off the centre, I think it was.
And that was really important, wasn't it? Because that's kind of a really in spirit of WAAG, that it was this decentralising initiative as well.
And generous. You want to show other people's work as well as your own. It wasn't just your own promotion. It was, this is what's happening in Ireland, this is what we're doing in Ireland. And I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And in terms of, again, we're thinking about this day as an opportunity to kind of build a fuller picture of WAAG. And its activities. Are there aspects that have yet to be fully talked about, or people whose contributions maybe have, kind of deserve a kind of fuller recognition? Or
I think there's always things to talk about in terms of how the feminine, how queer, how outside of the centre, the female experience always is. I think we can still go back to where you're not allowed in certain places, whose voices aren't heard, who's not getting to the table. I think there's a really interesting activism going on now as well that I know nothing about, but so there's a lot of kind of spaces where people are pushing forward, and WAAG was doing that, and those conversations are still alive, I think. But I do think that there's this kind of, it's another planet. It's another planet in terms of communication. It's another planet in terms of modes of access and modes of distribution. It's now, I mean, in this current political landscape, we're all still a bit like, what the hell is going on?
The end times.
Is this another kind of huge enfranchisement of misogyny and homophobia and kind of dispiriting time for people who don't have power and are poor and have no voices? It's almost like we're being sold a huge pup in the reality of experience. So I think those conversations are still alive.
I think, the organisations keep coming up. I just came to mind, like Michelle Brown and the Mothership. And there's so many organisations that come about because artists can't get the time, the money, the space to make their work, and that is for men and women. And we had people approach us. You asked about were there male
allies
support, and some men wanted to join WAAG, and there was a discussion about it. I think there was, my memory was I didn't care whether they came in or not. But I think the overall feeling was, look, we're on a roll here, we're going to do it ourselves. I'd like to mention, you can't run an organisation on your own. Tricia McKenna, Patricia Hurl, Terry Rudden, Helen Comerford, thank you.
Yeah.
Many people were involved in organising funding, organising, just doing the
And
work,
Carlisle as well.
keeping records, keeping, there was a kind of different sections running different things that you could kind of have all running along at the same time, and then coming together for a fundraiser.
And did people adopt specific roles or just take up different tasks depending on the moment and the project?
I think people were asked to help. I mean, the committee, took on most of the work. We met regularly, and many of us had children, and getting to meetings and getting home to collect kids from school and all that kind of stuff had to be taken into consideration. But there was just, I feel there was so much energy, that we were all like, we're going to get this, we're going to demand our space in
There's
this.
so much energy, but also, as Helena was saying, the amount of labour that it takes, the different claims and commitments that people have on their time. And WAAG had a lifespan. And it went out with a bang, you could say, with that amazing project in 1991. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
This was Pauline and Breda and other people, so I wasn't involved in it.
I think I found some paper. I was going through all my stuff, and I found something I'd written for an AGM, WAAG AGM in 1989. And it was about what are we going to do now. We were looking for a new executive committee, and we wanted votes to come forward and everything. And I was resigning because I had learned you don't stay in an organisation. You see other organisations and it's the same person all the time, same front of house. And I just thought that's not healthy for me or for WAAG. And so I wanted to resign, and then, but there was no one ready to come in and take it. So Breda came in and took it. And I took her role, and we just kept going till 91. That was hugely ambitious. We invited all the organisations, the International Association of Women Artists, to select one artist themselves to come, because we were the European capital that year. And so we were like, give us the money now, thanks very much. And they selected somebody, and then we were trying to figure out whose idea it was, because we want to kill them, that we would do site-specific work all down the Liffey, which is very romantic and very beautiful.
And hugely ambitious.
And silly. It was wonderful, because we were talking about, we took a river trip to show them, like, you could do something here at City Arts Centre, you could do something in IMA, and which was extraordinary, to be given access to IMA, to the Museum of Modern Art. What you want. Wouldn't happen now.
And that's its opening year as well, 1991, and Declan McGonigal as its first director, so there's already a connection there.
And we had Mary Robinson, which again, Breda was instrumental in getting Mary Robinson to open that event. But to answer your question, I just wanted to say that I nearly had, had a panic attack when I realised we have to do this. You can talk about
just an idea.
Now you have to do it. And but we got so much help. Dublin City Council. We had an artist make a sculpture in the middle of O'Connell Bridge.
Wow.
That spelt out the words crossover, because she came from Austria, I think. And she saw immediately, there's a north-south divide in this city. And so she had this lovely grass letters all along the centre of a... Wouldn't happen now.
She stayed with me that night.
That's where all the members... we all put people up.
Because everybody was willing to put people up.
And make the connections. Then we had another artist in Houston Station.
Yes.
She had a commemorative sculptural installation about 1916. Imagine that happening now. Can we have a sculpture in? No. So it's all,
Health and safety,
it was
yeah.
so
Yeah.
exciting. And
Yeah.
they gave us, access to old buildings to project slides onto, and powered it for us.
Yeah.
So it was all this kind of, can we have this, can we have that? But it was very positive. Whereas now it'd be, you can't do it, health and safety, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
and the funding and the agreements and the
But there
negotiations.
was no money
yeah.
going to
Yeah.
the city council. They were like, yeah, sure. How much
Yeah.
clay and grass do you want? So look, it was
Yeah.
really good stuff happening. And
Yeah.
all the members and the parties. Yeah. Married. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. In Derry, she was on the panel
Yeah.
in Derry
Thanks, Patricia, yeah.
yeah. And Aileen, yeah.
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 And as a teacher as well, as an
In
educator, she was very
NCAD,
important.
yeah. She was the sculpture, teaching in sculpture. The only woman.
And both of you have gone on to have roles in education. So
Yes.
again, thinking about legacy and thinking
Yeah.
about influence and thinking about the ways in which you have separately and collectively opened
Yeah.
up opportunities for generations of artists.
Well, at one stage, Alana,
Yeah.
Louise and myself were teaching in sculpture in
sculpture,
NCAD.
yeah.
Yeah. So that was amazing.
Yeah.
And you were an educator.
Yes, and Hartigan.
Anne Hartigan, the poet and artist. Yeah.
At the very early stages, as an instigator, actually, Anne Hartigan was really important, wasn't she?
I want to say about Mary Hanlon, which I couldn't remember your name staring at you. A huge, important member also of the committee, and a huge contributor to the success of WAAG.
So I want to think a little bit about the legacy of WAAG in different ways. And Louise, I might direct this to you, because obviously we were very involved in grassroots politics, particularly around queer organising and lesbian organising and support groups in Cork. And then you later became involved in Out Art. Which was
it
a
was
really
more
important.
Belfast that I was involved. Really, I went to college in Cork, but really was only kind of coming out as I went up to Belfast, and was on Lesbian Line, and also like Women's News and really important kind of solidarity spaces for women and lesbians in Northern Ireland, but also then around the Troops Out stuff, and International Women's Day was a very big thing that we'd all do from a grassroots, because a lot of Troops Out women would come over, and mostly lesbians actually at that time in that kind of organising. Sorry, what was your question?
It was just about, again, the legacy of WAAG and how something about the ethos of WAAG, about this kind of support systems, solidarity, making connections, making opportunities.
It was also very important to be cross-border. So Fiona Barber and I were sharing a house at the time, and she, we couldn't really, we were part of WAAG, but because of the border, it was a different country. And legislatively or kind of financially as well, we had to be separate to get grants and apply for grants. There were opportunities. I mean, grassroots stuff and community stuff was funded much more in Northern Ireland as a kind of colonial outpost with the war from the UK. And I think we were able to have other opportunities as part of WAAG. But I think also there was this very strong cross-border and from Derry down as well, so that there was that sense of activism. But for me, it was coming out of a lot of lesbian, queer, kind of feminist organising. And I was really not tuned in so much to the... I would try and get things and do things, but I was very chaotic and not as kind of professional as other people. I always felt, I'd get things that I'd get up and, do things. But the bits would be hard for me to pick up afterwards and run with. Whereas I think that was one of the strengths of other people like Fiona and
people in academic situations, I think, like Hilary Robinson.
That's right,
Alva Smith, you mentioned, in UCD, running the French department and inviting all these artists to talk to her students, bringing poets from America.
And funding people, giving people opportunities to lecture, to be funded, who'd never maybe been in the academy before or been in the institution. So I think a lot of women weren't used to power, weren't used to accessing space where they stood up and took attention. It was kind of quite complicated for a lot of women to manage themselves into these spaces. And there were other women who were really sweeping up kind of using their positions, like Maeve, like Alva, you know, I mean, a huge
Feminists.
amount. Also, people like Helen and Catherine and Emma, you know, who were making sure that when you had an idea, that you weren't like just going to ricochet off and kind of go like a burst balloon somewhere around the room and then deflate. That people go, yeah, I can, you know, let's do this. And so there was this sense of solidarity. I think that's been very powerful for me as a woman in Ireland, and as a person and as a queer person, and opening out and accessibility, but also inclusion. So the sense that intersectional feminism, that, you know, feminism got a really bad word, and then this idea of critical, you know, feminism is very non-inclusive, but I always felt that the feminisms I was working in and was enveloped in were very compassionate and inclusive, and had an understanding of the kinds of struggles people were operating within. What's interesting is when you went up through the pyramid, that became slightly sneery. I think it, you know, there was an institution that was going, oh well, are they really that cutting edge? Is this subject something we really want to be like lifting the lid on?
So you're still butting up against those ingrained power structures.
But actually, when you just thought, yeah, whatever, that's there, laws be there, let's move on. There was an incredible dynamism and support mechanism that continues in different iterations now, I think. You know?
And that's something that I think, Eve, you said before, institutions are made up of people. And, you know, you get to meet a person, and you have that connection with a person.
Well, it was really complicated to be a lesbian because you were illegal, and you know that up until 1993 we were operating physically. You know, it felt against the law and against, you know, if for getting pregnant you were going to be so dismissed. For not getting pregnant and having sex with an unauthorized body did feel like a problem, but also it felt if you went up there, you were going to be the Joan of Arc of lesbianism, and then nothing would be, you know, you couldn't make work, only it would be interpreted through a lesbian, you know what I mean? We wanted to be saying a lot of things, not just about, and it's that intersectionality. I think there was always a worry that if you came out as a woman, or you came out as queer, or working class, or disabled, or, you know, that there was a sense that that would be the label, because there wasn't enough room to just be an artist.
And you would be
woman.
limited by that then. I'm aware that we have so much to talk about.
And so many
Helena
people who can contribute.
Do you remember the fun parts that we had?
Yeah.
The organ
It's all about crack.
The fancy dress. Yeah.
And we went to the bank of Ireland, was it?
Patricia and another artist who has also passed away went with you. What's her name? I can't remember. Yeah. But I would just like to mention how amazing the work was. We were making amazing work. I mentioned to you when we were talking about Louise's work that I saw up in Belfast. Amazing, like creatures, women, horses made of these branches, and just powerful work. Patricia, you know, everyone was making fabulous work, and that was the really annoying thing. You know, that we weren't being seen, we weren't being acknowledged, we weren't being given the space. And then when we took the space, which we first did in the Kilmainham before it was Emma, it was amazing, you know, like to walk into a room full of amazing work, you know, not feminist, not Irish women, blah, 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 amazing art. And it was covered by the newspapers, it was really seen. That was... Breda got the British ambassador, but she didn't realise I was going to do a performance about Bloody Sunday.
On that note, I think we have this fantastic opportunity now, like during the lunch break, to go and see the show in the Arts Centre and to see kind of the documentation of that work. So that's probably really exciting to leave it on. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.